Think back to a time, maybe recently, when you felt just completely swamped. Maybe it was a deadline or something personal, and your emotions just felt huge, overwhelming, like this big wave just about to crash. It happens to all of us, right? And for students, well, managing those intense feelings alongside everything else, studies, social life, that's a real challenge. Today on the Deep Dive, we're looking into something that can really help, kind of like an anchor in those emotional storms. We're talking about mindfulness, and specifically, how it helps students regulate their emotions.
Exactly, and it's a really promising area. We've dug into quite a bit of research looking at these mindfulness-based interventions, or MBIs. We looked at studies checking their effectiveness, how well they reduce general psychological distress, and also their impact on students who might have struggled with self-injury. Plus, we get into the fascinating brain science bit, how mindfulness actually seems to shift things neurologically and psychologically. So our mission today is really to pull out the most useful bits on how mindfulness works and how it can help students find better emotional balance. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a really powerful skill.
Okay, so let's maybe start with the problem itself. Why is managing emotions so critical? The research we saw keeps pointing to this strong link between difficulties managing emotions, they call it emotion dysregulation, and just general psychological distress.
Right. And it's important to understand what that term emotion dysregulation actually means in this context. It's not just about feeling things intensely. It's more about, well, are you aware of your emotions? Can you accept them? And critically, can you control impulsive reactions when things get heated? Can you respond in a way that's actually helpful long term? When those skills aren't quite there, it really can make people feel overwhelmed and distressed.
And it goes beyond just feeling generally bad, doesn't it? The sources specifically mentioned a link between this dysregulation and something serious like non-suicidal self-injury, NSSI.
That's right. Some theories suggest that for certain individuals, NSSI can become a way to cope, almost like trying to release that pressure from intense negative emotions when regulation skills are lacking. And significantly, there was this big study, a meta-analysis. It combined findings from lots of other studies. It found a really clear link between emotion dysregulation and a higher risk of NSSI. And that held true across different ages and genders.
Wow, so that's a pretty robust finding then.
Very robust. It gives us a strong indication of that connection.
Something else that really stood out was the timing. Often it seems there's this rush of really negative feelings right before an act of NSSI.
That's a common pattern observed. And the act itself, tragically, can provide this very temporary relief from those awful feelings, that intense arousal.
Which brings up another factor. You mentioned impulsivity, acting rashly without thinking.
Yes, impulsivity is another key piece of the puzzle in NSSI. When strong emotions hit, if someone tends to act impulsively without considering consequences, the risk of self-injury goes up.
So it's like the difficulty managing the emotion fuels the impulsive act to try and escape it, like a cycle.
Exactly. The poor regulation can feed that impulsive urge in moments of high distress. And understanding this really sets the stage for why something like mindfulness could be beneficial. It targets these core issues.
Okay, so let's talk about that evidence. Mindfulness-based interventions, MBIs. One study zeroed in on university students, right? Including some who had a history of self-injury.
Yes, and what was interesting there was it was a short-term MBI, not some year-long commitment. But even with that brief intervention, the results were quite positive. The students in the mindfulness group, they showed significant improvements in overall mindfulness afterwards. Specifically, they got better at describing their inner experiences, like putting feelings into words, Vienna, and also better at non-reacting, meaning not getting immediately swept away by those feelings. They measured this using the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire.
Right, creating a little bit of space between the feeling and the reaction. That seems key. And what about their actual stress levels? Did that change?
It did. A significant reduction in stress scores on the DAS scale for the MBI group. And importantly, this reduction was seen not just right after the program, but also at a later follow-up point.
So the effects seem to stick around.
It suggests they did, yeah. The conclusion from that study was pretty clear. Even short-term MBIs can help strengthen these emotional regulation processes, and they can reduce that kind of hair-trigger emotional reactivity, even for individuals engaging in NSSI.
That's really quite hopeful. And was this finding backed up elsewhere?
Yes, another study we looked at, this one with senior students, also found a similar pattern. A brief mindfulness program led to fewer reported difficulties in overall emotion regulation. So it seems pretty consistent that even a relatively small dose of mindfulness training can make a noticeable difference.
It really underscores the potential value of making these kinds of tools available to students, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Even brief exposure seems to help foster these positive shifts in navigating their emotional world.
Okay, so we see what it does. Let's get into the how. The brain mechanisms involved here sound fascinating.
Yeah, the neurobiology is really interesting. Brain imaging studies are giving us some clues. One key finding involves the amygdala. You can think of it as the brain's sort of emotional alarm center, especially for threat or negativity. Well, mindfulness training seems to be linked with reduced activity in the amygdala when people are looking at emotionally charged pictures, for instance.
So it helps dial down the intensity of that initial emotional reaction.
That seems to be part of it, yes. But it's not just about turning things down. The research also points to stronger connections, better communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, specifically the ventral medial part, the VMPFC.
Ah, the VMPFC. That's more involved in regulation and control, right?
Exactly. It helps with higher level thinking, decision making, emotional control. So mindfulness might be strengthening the pathways between the emotional response center and the regulation center. Better teamwork, you could say.
So the brain is literally learning to manage emotional signals more effectively through the practice.
That's the leading hypothesis. Repeated practice might physically alter these neural circuits, leading to more adaptive regulation skills over time. And this fits with other findings too. People who naturally score higher on trait mindfulness, just being more mindful day to day, tend to use more effective emotion regulation strategies anyway.
Interesting. And it seems the effects might be even broader, maybe influencing things like emotional intelligence.
That's another angle some research explores. Mindfulness might boost emotional intelligence, understanding your own emotions, understanding others. And by improving that, it could lead to people perceiving less stress in situations. They feel more equipped to handle things.
It's like it gives you a clearer map of your own internal landscape, making it less scary or overwhelming to navigate.
That's a great way to put it. And while mindfulness and emotion regulation are obviously very linked, researchers see them as related but distinct concepts. Mindfulness, that present moment awareness and acceptance, seems to build the foundation for better regulation. It gives you clarity on what you're actually experiencing internally without immediately judging it or reacting to it.
So by being more aware and accepting, we get better at actually doing something constructive with the feeling.
Precisely. MBIs might specifically target the regulation deficits seen in various emotional difficulties. They do this by cultivating mindfulness, sure, but also things like self-compassion, meta-awareness, being aware of your thoughts. And at the same time, reducing that automatic reactivity, both emotional and cognitive, and cutting down on rumination or worry loops.
And you mentioned longer-term studies showing brain changes, too.
Yes, longitudinal fMRI studies looking at people over time showed differences in how brain regions get activated during emotion regulation tasks in mindfulness practitioners. These involve areas linked not just to emotional reactivity, but also interoception awareness of internal body states and somatosensory awareness.
Okay, this is all really compelling, but let's make it practical. For someone listening, feeling maybe stressed right now,
Yeah.
what do these techniques actually involve? Are they complicated?
Not at all, actually. The practices used in these studies are often very simple and accessible. One core technique is just mindful breathing, simply paying attention to the physical sensation of your breath coming in and going out. No need to change it, just notice it. Another common one is the body scan. You systematically bring your awareness to different parts of your body, maybe feet, legs, torso, arms, head. Just noticing any sensations, warmth, tingling, pressure, tightness, without judging them or needing them to be different.
We have talked about mindful breathing before. It's surprisingly powerful just for grounding yourself. What else?
There's mindful stretching, doing gentle movements, but really focusing on the physical sensations as you move. And importantly, it's not just about setting aside time for formal practice. You can bring mindfulness into everyday activities too, like really paying attention to the water temperature and soup smell when washing dishes, or noticing the tastes and textures when you eat. Informal practice.
So the main idea is that gentle, non-judgmental focus on whatever's happening right now. And the research suggests you don't need to commit hours a day for it to start helping.
That's a really crucial point. Many of the studies we looked at showed significant benefits from brief interventions. We're talking maybe 8 sessions over 3 weeks, or perhaps 6 weekly meetings, things that are much more manageable for busy students.
That makes it feel much more doable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not some huge undertaking.
Definitely. One study specifically showed that a brief MBI improved emotion regulation and increased levels of awareness and acceptance, those key mindfulness facets in senior students. And interestingly, in that study, they found a direct link. The more students actually did the practices between sessions, the better their awareness got, and the fewer problems they had with things like non-acceptance of emotions or lack of clarity about their feelings.
So practice really does seem to make a difference, even in small amounts.
It really suggests that. Perhaps the total contact time in the sessions isn't the only factor, but consistent engagement with the practices themselves is key. It supports the idea that shorter programs can be genuinely effective in getting students started and helping them build resilience.
And did the students themselves find these useful? Were they engaged?
Yeah, in one of the studies, most students actually reported that the brief MBI had a positive effect on their lives. And the researchers noted good engagement overall. That's really encouraging feedback, suggesting these techniques resonate and can be readily adopted.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up then. What we've seen is pretty clear evidence that mindfulness can be a really valuable tool for students dealing with tough emotions. It seems to help them get a better handle on those feelings, reducing overall distress, and importantly, seems particularly helpful for those who might be using self-injury to cope. And this isn't just wishful thinking. It seems linked to actual changes in how the brain processes and regulates emotion, involving areas like the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Plus, the techniques themselves, breathing, body scans were simple, accessible, and maybe the most encouraging part is that even brief programs, just a few weeks, can make a real measurable difference.
That sums it up really well. It highlights both the mechanisms and the practical potential.
So, maybe a final thought to leave you with. If just taking a few moments each day, simply noticing your breath, can start to shift your emotional landscape, what other possibilities might open up if we intentionally cultivate this skill? Could mindfulness be perhaps a key piece in building not just academic skills, but real emotional resilience in ourselves and in the students we know?
It's certainly a powerful question to consider, and for anyone listening who is interested, those techniques we mentioned, mindful breathing, body scans, they're easy to find resources for. We'd encourage you to explore them, maybe look into mindfulness apps or websites, many specifically designed for students.
Great advice. Thanks again for sharing these insights today, and thanks all of you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, take care.